All right. So good morning, everyone. This is Director Bishotsky, co-chair of the Drought Interagency Coordinating Group. Thank you all for attending. I know we have some people with us here physically, and I know we have at least one presenter and maybe some others online. Before we start the meeting, I'd like to turn this over to Maggie Martin, the Drought Program Coordinator here at the Department of Water Resources, to go over some of the logistics.
Thank you, Director Buchatsky, and thank you all for joining us today. We ask that you please remain muted unless you are speaking. If you're a member of the ICG and would like to speak, please type your name into the chat and we will unmute you, or you may feel free to unmute yourself. If you're a member of the public, please type your questions and or comments into the chat. You can also unmute yourself when there is time for public comment. This meeting and everything in the chat will be recorded. The recording will be posted on the ADWR YouTube page. And lastly, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please contact the ADWR Help Desk at 602-771-8444 or email tickets@azwater.gov. Go next slide.
Thanks, Maggie. So can everyone hear us well enough? And we cannot see, since we're sharing our screen, we cannot see who's on. It might be worthwhile to stop sharing for a second to see. There we go. Can we just scroll down and see?
I don't have anything in the chat yet.
We can hear you well.
All right, thank you. So we do have, looked like 15 or so online folks without counting the exact number. So we will move forward then into our agenda. And again, those members of the group, as Maggie described, who want to talk, we will unmute you, or you can unmute yourself if that's possible. I don't know if my co-chair, Gabe Levine, is with us or not. I didn't see his name pop up, but again, Gabe is the director of the Arizona Division of Emergency Management. You know, he's been very busy these last couple of months. So, Gabe, if you're with us, welcome. If not, we'll see you next time. So again, this group has met biannually since 2006 to make a recommendation to the governor about whether to maintain the drought emergency declaration, which has been in place since June of 1999. This is an advisory group to the governor composed of over 20 federal, state agencies, and tribes. So as is our normal method of business, we have presentations that give us the type of information we need to make the recommendation. We kind of summarize what that information is, and then we have members of the group decide on what the recommendation will be. So our first presenter is Dr. Erin Saffel. She is the state climatologist and drought monitoring technical committee co-chair. She will give us a drought status update and an update on the monitoring technical committee activities. Erin.
Thank you, Director. I appreciate that. And we'll go to the next slide. Thank you very much. I'm going to give an overview of the water year that we just finished, kind of diving in a little bit into what happened with winter versus summer and kind of where we landed. So if we can go to the next slide, please. And so looking here at these maps, you're seeing temperature and precipitation from October to September. So the entire water year, kind of zooming in and looking at individual weather stations and bringing that out and seeing what happened across the state. And so you can see that temperatures were warmer than normal for the water year. You can see that precipitation was lower than normal for most of the state. For the water year, you can see that it's been hot and dry, and that precipitation that we're looking at, we had a little bit in Coconino County, a little bit in Yuma County, and we'll dive into when that happened. So we'll go to the next slide, please. I do want to look at this water year information. So overall, looking at the total amount of precipitation, we were able to come to an estimate. Usually when we look at statewide precipitation, we look at what's happening across the state, what's happening across the county, but we didn't have those data available at this time. And so we've estimated where we stand with our precipitation for the entire water year statewide, and you can see that it's much lower than normal. The average amount, the long-term average amount of precipitation for the state is around 12 inches. And you can see that this last water year, it was between 6.73, 7.35. That's an estimated amount of statewide precipitation. And that's really largely because we only had 3 months last water year that were above average. And so you can see those are listed there with May, June, and September. If you look at the map, you're seeing individual weather stations and kind of their ranking for their water year precipitation, whether they were drier than normal. And you can see that some locations, especially in the southeast portion of the state, were much lower than normal. You're looking at the chart, and it's showing you the water year precipitation for the state, and you can see that it's ranging up and down for each year, for each water year. I put in that blue line at the bottom, giving you our estimated amount and kind of the ranking of where this water year stands. And it's definitely within the lowest 10 water years on record. So we'll see when we get those data back in exactly where that ends up, but that's what we're looking at right now. Next slide, please. So kind of looking at what happened with winter versus summer, we're going to take a look at October to April as our winter types of precipitation and temperature amounts. You can see that October, if you remember, October was the hottest October on record for the state. It started cooling off in November, but then December was the hottest December on record for the state last year. So part of this water year, February was the second hottest on record. And then looking at precipitation, December and January. December was the second driest statewide. January is the 15th driest statewide. If we bring those together, December, January, that was the driest December and January together for statewide precipitation on record. February, we had one storm. It ended up being the 20th driest February on record for the state. And then in March, we started getting some precipitation. We had a couple of systems in March. We had a couple in April, and that was helpful when we're looking at adding to that precipitation. I didn't include May in here, but May was actually a wet May. One thing to understand is when we start looking at the driest months statistically for the state, May and June are the driest for the state. And so even though we ended up having a wet May on record, it still wasn't a lot of excessive amounts of precipitation overall. Next slide, please. And so then looking at that March precipitation, that April precipitation, you can see it here with our snow water equivalent charts. And you can see where that landed. So if we look at the entire state, so the lower Colorado River Basin, you can see March 16th had the highest peak for getting in that SWE. It still didn't reach out over 100% median. And zooming in, you'll see Salt and Little Colorado Basin and Verde Basin, same kinds of situations where March was the best. Precipitation for our snow water equivalent, overall ending with a late peak and a below median amount of SWE for the year, for the water year. Next slide, please. And then comes monsoon. So we start looking at that precipitation. Monsoon, we all remember, runs from June 15th to September 30th, looking at that precipitation. 2025, you're looking at the monsoon precipitation overall, looking at the anomalies. Was it wetter than normal, looking at the monsoon? And you can see that Yuma actually did get a good amount of precipitation for the monsoon season. Again, the same kind of thing that we deal with when we're looking at Yuma during the monsoon season. It's not a lot of precipitation. So even though there was 5 times the amount of normal precipitation in Yuma, it still was just slightly over an inch of precipitation when we're looking at that in August. Maricopa County did, in some areas did okay. You can see Mojave County did okay. We know that Globe was above average. You can kind of compare that to see what has happened over the last 4 monsoon seasons, wet versus dry overall. So we've been dealing with some drier monsoon seasons. If you go to the next slide, you'll see where that kind of lines up, kind of keeping track of statewide precipitation for winter versus summer, whether it's above average or below average. What we're looking at here is June to September, looking at statewide precipitation and temperature kind of anomalies, looking at what they ended up, were they above average, below average. And so for the most part, the state was warmer for the summer. There were some areas that were wetter. You can see that in Yuma County, you can see La Paz, you can see Mojave County, Maricopa County, a little bit above average. And then part of that, what we're looking at with June to September, that is bringing in that early June precipitation we experienced in the state with our first tropical system, Alvin, coming in. And so that did allow June to be one of the wetter Junes on record. Again, still statistically one of overall, June is the driest month of the year for the state. Getting a little bit of extra is good. Next slide, please. And so what ended up happening with our short-term drought overall, you can see that coming out of the monsoon season last year and moving into a drier winter overall, you can see that the short-term drought started advancing in winter and again in spring. And so you can see that expansion occurring until we started getting some precipitation during the monsoon season. We got a little bit, as I mentioned, the first part of June. When we're starting to look at July and August, not exceptional amounts of precipitation, but certainly in September, we did get some of that precipitation that assisted. When we're looking at that September precipitation, we had it at the first part the mid part of September, and that assisted some of the dry soil. So when we had that system at the end of September, that did assist having that water just flow. And so there'll be some chat about that. We'll have some discussion about that. Next slide, please. We do evaluate long-term drought, and with long-term drought, we go back to 72 months of data, trying to evaluate how the temperature and the precipitation overall plays a role in that long-term situation. And you can see our long-term drought maps, and you can see that the long-term drought has expanded, especially looking at July to September. If we look at the last 5 years of records, you can see that Arizona statewide has experienced the 6th hottest and the 7th driest 5 years on record. And so that assists with what happens with our long-term drought. Next slide, please. And so overall, kind of that movement for our water year started hotter and drier for winter, some improvement in May and June. July and August, hotter and drier, so not as much as what we would like to see. July and August statistically are the wettest months for our monsoon season. And then we did see some improvement with precipitation in September. Next slide, please. I'm grateful for all of your assistance. Thank you for all your help in talking about these ideas, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Saffel. First in the room, members of the group, any questions? How about folks online? Any questions? Members of the group? So I just have one observation. Maybe the one place in the entire state, Yuma, that doesn't want precipitation in August and September because of its impacts on their agriculture. But that's where we get it. That's, I guess, living in the desert. So we will move on then to the next item on our agenda, and it will be led by Mark O'Malley, lead forecaster for the National Weather Service and Drought Monitoring Tech Committee. He'll give us a weather outlook for winter 2025 and 2026. And I just want to say thank you, Mark. We always think you are a critical person in our world. So thank you for convincing your superiors to let you come and participate with us, because what you provide to us is really very important. So Mark, go ahead.
Thank you, Director Brushatsky. Hopefully after this presentation, you'll still be thanking me.
Well,
There's a mixed bag, actually. It's not all bad news. There actually is some good news in this presentation. So go to the next slide, please. There we go. And I think if you click it, yeah, I'll start animating here. And what we're looking at is another weak La Nina event this winter. And that's characterized by all those blue, colder than normal sea surface temperatures across the tropical Pacific. You can see as this advances right across the middle of the screen there, those blues and those waves going across the tropical Pacific become more numerous and the magnitude increases. So that's our weak La Nina. Maybe not unlike last year, actually. Now, that said, just because this looks like last year doesn't necessarily mean that the outcome will be the same as last year. So go to the next slide, please. So we are looking at a 65% chance of weak La Nina conditions returning this fall and early winter. There are a few models that have nothing absolutely this winter and some models that go into more moderate La Nina. However, the majority of output suggests a weak and brief La Nina like last year, whereby the end of the winter, early spring, we actually revert back to an ENSO neutral phase. Now, the greatest uncertainty is, will this La Nina event be strong enough and persist long enough to have influence over our weather this winter? And will we actually be characterized as a La Nina? Technically, last year did not get characterized as a La Nina. It was a neutral winter because the conditions did not persist for long enough. However, we did see a phase of La Nina type weather last winter. So that's the big question this year is, will we see that La Nina type weather have influence over Arizona? Next slide, please. So the temperature outlook in the top left indicates this is temperatures. A slightly enhanced chance that the average temperature over January, February, and March will be above normal. That's not uncommon for the winter around the Southwest these past 20, 30 years. On the top right, this is the standardized temperature anomaly during weak La Nina events. And not surprisingly, the two maps on the top almost mirror each other. Basically, the forecaster says what's happened in previous weak La Nina events. We're basically going to forecast that to happen again. This is a recurring pattern, so we should see a recurring outcome. On the bottom right is what's probably the most important for the Southwest, and that's the trend in temperatures we've seen over the past 50 plus years. We're warming at a 0.5 degree Fahrenheit per decade across Arizona. This is the entire state from November through April. So you take out some of the urbanization. This is everybody included. And the La Nina events are in the stars and the circles. The circles are the weak events. The stars are the moderate and strong events. And there's really not too much correlation as far as the La Nina phase, but it's more centered on that trend, the 0.5 degree per decade, as you see that trend line going from the 70s through current. Those dots and stars are pretty much aligned either side of that line. Interestingly, a couple of years ago, we experienced a cool and wet La Nina event. That was actually one of the cooler winters we've experienced in the past 30 to 40 years. We can hope for that again. However, the preponderance of output that we see is towards the warmer than average. So that's what I would be betting on. Next slide, please. Precipitation. This is recent La Nina winters, November through April. I included last year in the bottom right. It was almost a La Nina. but it had very much La Nina tendencies with extremely dry conditions across the Southwest. As Erin mentioned in her presentation, very dry for Arizona. However, that's not always the case during weak La Nina events. 2022 and 23 and 2016 and 17, there was a good amount of moisture across the state and decent areas that were wetter than normal. However, the preponderance in the other years is for a drier than average winter during La Ninas. So from a planning standpoint, I would definitely be planning for the drier end of the events, knowing that there is a small probability that we could end up on the wetter side of things. And there is some evidence in what we are seeing in the near-term forecast and what we've seen in the weather pattern that we may actually see a near normal winter out of all this when all is said and done. Next slide, please. So the official forecast on the top left suggests better odds that the winter will be below normal as far as precipitation. And again, that matches pretty much on the top right. This is standardized precipitation anomalies during weak La Nina events and is across the southern United States predominantly dry during La Nina events. In the bottom right, this is Arizona precipitation during the November through April timeframe. And the biggest thing here is all those dots and stars, with the exception of a few, are all on the bottom of the chart. Some of our driest winters occur during La Ninas. Doesn't mean that every La Nina is like that. A couple of years ago, we were actually slightly above normal. We can hope for that. But again, from a planning purpose, I would definitely be planning towards the below normal outcome when all is said and done this fall, this winter and spring. Next slide, please. This is looking at the upper Colorado Basin. As you note in the top right graph, upper Colorado Basin is right in that threshold between the drier than normal and the wetter than normal to the north. So if we look at the dots and the stars in the bottom right-hand graph, there's a pretty distinct distribution of above normal and below normal across the upper Colorado. So there's essentially an equal chance that the upper part of the basin, the headwaters, either ends up above or below. We can hope for a year like 2022-23 when the upper Colorado was distinctly above normal. So we'll see what comes out of this winter. Next slide, please. This is just looking back at some of the monsoon precipitation. I'll go through this fairly quickly since Erin already showed some of this, but something I do want to pull out of this is the upper basin was actually fairly dry during this monsoon. Much of eastern Utah and western Colorado was in the lowest third of historical summer rankings and less than 75% of normal precipitation for the monsoon. Now, they're not as dependent on monsoon as we are, whereas there's some of the lower elevations of Arizona saw decent precipitation, but even some of the White Mountains and along the rim in Arizona actually saw below normal precipitation. So that wouldn't have been as good. However, what happened in the next slide is what happened in October. And this is actually very good for us and a lot of the good news. Combination of a couple tropical systems basically allowed a large influx of moisture to surge into the Southwest during the first half of October and produced locally heavy monsoon rainfall, monsoon-like rainfall totals. Wasn't necessarily in the monsoon, but the bottom left graph shows the percent of normal, and this is just during October. There were some areas that were 300 to 500% of normal during October, and that even extended up into the upper part of the Colorado Basin. So on the bottom right is actually a NASA 0 to 10 centimeter soil moisture plot. And this was in the end of October, and our soil moisture responded very well due to these events. Not only there was stuff at the end of September, but this October event did very well, even into the upper basin, such that a lot of the basin now, the soil moisture is right around the 50th percentile. So going into this coming up spring, I would expect, and especially with the system coming up this weekend, reinforcing this moisture, that our runoff efficiency this spring is going to be much better than what we've experienced the past several years, where we've headed into the winter season with very dry soil. This time we're heading into the winter with somewhat moist or average soil moisture. So that's the good news. Whatever we get in snow water this year should be fairly efficient in the runoff. So go to the next slide. I believe this is my summary here. And just, a brief week La Nina. Just a reminder that most of the driest winters in Arizona occur during La Ninas. So that's what I would be planning for. There are some signs that we may not be towards the absolute driest. We can hope for something a little better, but that's what we should plan for. And again, the good news is really that heavy rainfall in October really allowed soil moisture profiles to recover. So we can really expect some decent efficiency in the runoff in the spring. And with that, I am finished, and I will take any questions if anybody has any.
Thanks, Mark. First, questions from members around the table. Hearing none. Questions from members online. Hearing none. So that wasn't so bad.
No.
Improved soil moisture conditions in the upper basin. It's
I'll
the best
be-
news I've heard in a long time.
Now we just need the snow on top of
Just,
that.
we need some snow.
Now we need the snow.
Hey, hope springs eternal. So we can move on then to the next agenda item, which is item 5, Colorado River Water Supply Update. Lindsay Capito, hydrologist with the Department of Water Resources. Colorado River Management section will lead us through that discussion. Lindsay.
Thank you, Director Bushatsky. Let's go to the next slide, please. These are the current conditions in the Colorado River Basin. As of November 2nd, Lake Mead was at an elevation of 1,057 feet, which is about 32% of capacity. Lake Powell was at elevation 3,545 feet, which is only about 29% of capacity. These smaller reservoirs are as follows. We have 64% of capacity at Fontanelle, 82 at Flaming Gorge, 48 at Blue Mesa. Morrow Point is sitting at about 95% of capacity, and Navajo is around 60%. Our total system storage at the moment is 21.8 million acre feet, which is about 37% of capacity. For comparison, this time last year, we were at about 24.7 million acre feet, which is 42% of capacity. You can go to the next slide, please. Water year 2025 saw dry conditions throughout the Colorado River Basin, as we've heard in the last 2 presentations. You can see on the figure to the left, the orange and red and some yellow spots denote below average precipitation spread throughout the Colorado River Basin. The figure to the right shows precipitation above Lake Powell, and the black line is the median value from 1991 through 2020. The dark blue line is water year 2025, and you can see that precipitation tracked just below the median until spring of 2025, when drier conditions started, and we ended the year at about 84% of normal. Okay. Oh, well, I'll mention also the lower left-hand corner. I'm sorry. The lower left-hand corner is water year 2026. Even though we've only started, that increase in precipitation in October does put us above the median to start out water year 2026. Next slide, please. Sorry about that. As you might imagine from the last slide, runoff was also less than stellar for water year 2025. The figure on the left shows water year 2025, the 7-day cumulative average. The upper blue line represents the highest observed runoff, so that's 1984. The lower line is the driest, so the lowest observed runoff, which was 2002. And then that green band is the 25th through 75th percentile. And during water year 2025, we were tracking right along the lower 25th percentile, again, until mid-spring when conditions became drier.
and we dipped down below that 25th percentile. Water year 2026, which has just begun on the right-hand side, puts us about that median value so far, again, thanks to the wet conditions during October. Next slide, please. These are the intervening flows between Lake Powell and Lake Mead. Water year 2025 saw 548,000 acre feet of intervening flows, which is about 68% of the 5-year average. Next slide, please. We'll sprinkle in some good news. The lower basin states continue to conserve water. The lower basin conserved over 1 million acre feet of water just in 2025 and are on track to conserve more than 3.8 million acre feet by the end of 2026. Next slide, please. Here we're looking at the unregulated inflow forecast for Lake Powell. Along the bottom, you can see the water years from 1964 all the way through 2026. The black line is the average, and those last 3 bars are the minimum probable, the most probable, and the maximum probable inflow forecasts, which are 4.1, 7.6, and 14.5 million acre feet respectively. This was issued in early October, so they've since updated the most probable forecast to 8.1 million acre feet, which is 84% of normal. Next slide, please. I definitely won't spend too much time on this after those 2 great climatology presentations that we had, but I'll just note that the Colorado River Basin does appear to have drier and warmer conditions, especially in the lower basin. And then, as Mark mentioned, maybe dry, maybe wet in the upper basin. Next slide, please. Here we're looking at model results from the Colorado River Midterm Modeling System. It's called CRIMS, and that's the model that the Bureau of Reclamation uses to project water elevations at Lake Powell and Lake Mead. Here you can see the figure for Lake Powell, and those gray lines are the model runs, which are sometimes called traces. And I've highlighted the minimum probable, which is the red line, the most probable, which is the green line, and the maximum probable, which is the blue line. For the end of calendar year 2025, the most probable elevation for Lake Powell is 3,536 feet, which is just about 27% of capacity. If we project out into the future, the uncertainty increases, as you can see with the spread of the traces. Additionally, we have operational uncertainty after September of 2026, which is shown by that gray shaded box. With those caveats, the most probable end of calendar year 2026 elevation is 3,532 feet. You'll also notice that the minimum probable line does dip below a couple important elevations. The first is elevation 3525 that happens in February of 2026. And the second is elevation 3500, which happens in August of 2026. Those are elevations that were set forth in the Drought Contingency Plan and the 2024 SCIS Record of Decision to trigger consultation between Reclamation and the states to protect critical elevations at Powell. And so I just wanted to note that both of those triggers have been met. Next slide, please. Oh, and sorry. It's a very similar figure for Lake Mead. We're seeing the most probable end of calendar year 2025 elevation at 1,059 feet. That's a level 1 shortage condition, which is the same as last year. With the aforementioned caveats, the end of calendar year 2026 projection is for 1,053 feet. And next slide, please. That's all I have. Thank you.
Questions from members around the table first for Lindsay?
Yes, I have a question, Lindsay. I'm assuming that the projections beyond 2026 are based just on the current set of rules that we have because we don't know anything else. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And then Director Bushowski, do we have any idea on when a timetable on anything?
So we released a formal statement yesterday along with the 6 other states and the federal government that said we've made some progress. We're going to continue to talk. And so I don't have a good answer for when that might happen. I think we will try everything we can up to the last minute we have to try to find a path forward. I did want to mention a couple things to supplement what Lindsay said first. When she talked about those 2 critical elevations, potentially dipping below power pool, there are things in motion now that might mean more water might be moved to Lake Powell from those reservoirs above Lake Powell, or they might reduce our flow from Lake Powell to Lake Mead. So you can imagine that is an issue of strong discussion among the 7 states about which one of those 2 things should happen. The other thing I wanted to point out, she had the slide about intervening flows, and we were below average significantly in those intervening flows. If you do the math, and we don't need to go back to the slide, and if I know how to do math still, that's about 4 feet of elevation in Lake Mead compared to the average that we're not getting. That's not insignificant, because the projection Lindsay showed for Lake Mead is we're right on the cusp of going to the next shortage tier if we keep the same operational guidelines moving forward. So while we talk a lot about the runoff in the upper basin, those intervening flows below Glen Canyon Dam are not insignificant in terms of the outcomes that can occur from a water supply standpoint when you start hovering around trigger elevation. So with that, I think we can move on to the next agenda item, 6. Stephen Flores, Senior Hydrologist, Salt River Project, will update us on Salt River and Verde River watersheds, water supply update. Stephen.
Thank you, Director Bushowski. So I'll talk a little bit about what we've seen over the last year as far as weather and water impacting the Salt and Verde watershed and SRP reservoirs and water supplies. Next slide. So from previous, we obviously are aware that the water year 2025 was a very dry water year. That is the same across the Salt and Verde watershed. We saw about 11.28 inches or 69% of normal for all of water year 2025 across the Salt and Verde watershed. Really, the big thing that impacted with that last winter, we really saw very dry conditions all of fall, previous monsoon, all of fall, and most of the winter. You can see we didn't get much significant precipitation until March. And so by that time, we had been waiting and conditions were dry. So we got 2 weeks of snow up there, which mostly sublimated, evaporated, transpiration, infiltration, really didn't get any runoff from it most of the entire winter. We continued with some sporadic, smaller precipitation throughout. We saw some of that June that was mentioned, precipitation, and we really didn't start seeing those significance until that late September precipitation across the watershed, right there at the end where it spiked up. And if you go to the next slide, this is what we saw across the Salt and Verde watershed for the monsoon season. You can see that's above normal June, but June's typically drier. You can see July and August were below normal, but then we had that above normal September. A lot of the areas that, particularly in September, along the Mogollon Rim, there, North Payson, parts of the Middle Verde, as well as higher elevations in the White Mountains and the Upper Salt. And also the Globe, Miami area, some of the lower precipitations. A lot of that late September storm, a lot of it was below the reservoirs. It was in the valley. Phoenix saw almost 2 inches in one of those days. So a lot of it was below or very lower parts of the watershed. So it did help the watershed parts with conditions, but we didn't see a big boost other than some into Roosevelt, Salt River with that Globe Miami impact of flooding. Next slide. If we look at what we saw as far as stream flow across the watershed, this is a daily mean stream flow for the entire water year. You can see for the Verde is in green, the Salt is red, and Tondo in blue. You can see that they're all fairly level around the 100, 200 CFS range throughout most of the year until that late September event. We saw that particularly on the Salt. You can kind of see it blown up. We saw our highest flows at the very end of the water year, across the whole water year, which it was fairly high on the Salt, but the other two were several hundred CFS increase, but not significant compared to what we typically get in a good winter, and where we really see those big storms help refill the reservoirs. We didn't get any of that. In fact, we saw the winter season, we saw very little runoff increase above base flow. We saw actually the lowest inflow into SRP reservoirs. On the Salt, Tonto, and Verde, we saw the lowest amount on record of volume of water flowing into the reservoirs for the winter months from January through May. We saw about 97,000 acre feet during the winter. That we saw the second lowest inflow into the SRP reservoir, Salt, Tondo, Verde, with about a little under 42,000. Second only to 2020 was lower, and that last September amount helped us not be neck and neck with 2020. It made us clearly the second lowest, but still the second lowest inflow. So we really all winter we didn't see really any runoff above our base flow levels throughout. We saw our lowest water year for water year 2025, the lowest inflow on record, 205,000 acre feet for October of last year through September 30th this year. So that's 30% of median. Previously, it was water year 2018. That was previously the lowest winter on record as well. So what does that mean going into this water year in 2026 on the Salt and Verde? The good news is, next slide, as mentioned, we saw a very good October with some good October storms that really helped those soil moisture conditions, the watershed conditions. That was clearly observed on the Salt and Verde as well. Starting with that late September one, I mentioned that it was mostly below the reservoirs. Even with the the lowest runoff we'd seen in a water year, we still spilled water at Granite Reef because of that September. It wasn't reservoir spill, it was just local runoff, but just to mention that had a significant amount of runoff below the reservoirs in late September, causing a small spill from Granite Reef Dam. Again, no reservoir spill. Lower tributaries started flowing as well. So we really started to see flow. And then next slide into the October, that's where we saw that October event impact much more on the watershed and not just the valley. So we started seeing much more increased flows across the Salt and Verde in those October storms. We saw, in October, over 3 inches of precipitation, mostly in that mid-October storm event. So a good amount over a 4 to 5 day period. And you can see areas all throughout the central parts of the Salt and Verde. We saw that significant amount as those several days of storms came through. We saw 3.18 inches, over 300% of normal in October. You can also see on that graph, that's just a 5-day period in mid-October with the Verde's in blue this time, the Salt is in green, and the Tondo is in black. But you can see almost 8,000 CFS increase on the Verde, and 14,000 plus CFS on the Salt, 4,000 on Tondo. These are the highest peak flows we've seen since March of 2023. So this is good news going into this winter, because last fall, we were as dry. We had we had very dry conditions going into last winter, so it stayed dry, so we didn't see. But this is good news, because if this continues going in, even if we get normal precipitation, we'll start seeing more effective runoff from the snowpack or rain or mix up to more immediately from that in the winter, during the winter runoff season, versus later and being lesser amounts. So you can see for that 5-day period, the inflow response, we saw about 66,000 acre feet of added water onto the Saltano Verde into the SRP reservoirs. That was more volume of water than we saw the previous 5 months coming in for comparison. Total of about 85,000 for the entire month of October, which is about 335% of median. So well above median runoff in October. So that is good news. Going into the next runoff season, we see maybe slightly below projections with maybe a La Nina, but with that neutral, we see a lot of variability. And really it depends when the storms hit on the salt. It's not as snowpack dominated on the upper Colorado. It's that mix of snow and rain. And so it really depends on when we get those storms, how much, if it's together, if it's spread out, if it's snow melt, if it's rain. So the amount. But the good news is with this, when we do see that water on whether snow or rain on the watershed, it'll be much more effective starting out as far as runoff this winter compared to last winter. Next slide. Current conditions. We did increase by 2% because of those October. We were at 53% earlier in October. We increased up to 55%, about 1.25 million acre feet of total storage on the system, which is that 55%. You can see we're about 55% on the Verde. Roosevelt is about 45%. We've seen the most decline in Roosevelt over the last year because of how dry water year 2025 was. So you've seen a drop in Roosevelt over that period of time because most of our water deliveries have been made from the larger salt supply in Roosevelt particularly. We're continuing to deliver off of the salt because of how dry it had been with lower Verde conditions until we get some more runoff, which we typically will switch over to the Verde to make releases for water delivery in the winter. So CC Cragen's also about 30%. It had been 20% or so most of the year. Slight increase from this October storms as well. Next slide. If you look at it over the last couple years of SRP reservoir storage, you can see we had that very wet winter in 2023, helped refill the system. Those are critical to help us get through years like we just saw, where we drought, because you can see the impact. We had a very wet year, then an average year, stayed fairly relatively high, but over this last year, you can see that drop in storage. We're still at 55%. That is right around median for this time of year in storage. So we're still right around our median storage for this time of year. And hopefully we'll be starting to go back up if we get some of those storms this winter and see more productive winter. But we'll see some of the impacts that it's had. You can see that we were kind of in 2023, after we filled up, we were closer to our minimum pumping values of 75 to 100,000. This year we increased to 150,000 for our total groundwater use for SRPs, groundwater and surface use balance. And next year we plan to increase to 225,000 acre feet of total groundwater use for 2026 in SRP, surface water and groundwater use. So you can see that response to for more groundwater use in that balance between the surface water and groundwater supplies. Again, we're preparing for floods this winter and hoping for those, but we're also planning for drought and continue to plan to have that kind of balance and that reliable water supply. So next slide. Overall, again, just to summarize those water year 2025, we saw record low inflows, particularly the winter in total. Monsoon, we really didn't see stuff until that late September, and then those October storms really produced some good, more significant runoff, which is good news going into this winter, into the winter runoff season. So that's all I have. If there's any questions, next slide.
Questions for Stephen from members around the table first? Hearing none. Questions from members online? Hearing none, we can move to agenda item 7. Impacts of drought and extreme heat on public health. We have with us virtually Nikki Kosh, Climate and Health Program Manager, Arizona Department of Health Services. Sorry, I didn't even take a shot at your middle name.
That's okay. You did great. Thank you.
I think I would with my last name, but go ahead. Sorry. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm representing the Climate and Health Program at ADHS, and my focus today is on the intersection of drought and public health and sharing about some of our programs that look at extreme weather conditions and how that impacts health. Next slide, please. This visual is a roadmap illustrating the complete cycle of climate impacts on human health. Drought's core effects amplify our risk for extreme heat. Drought exacerbates high temperatures, contributing to heat-related illness and death. Environmental degradation. Lack of moisture increases dust and particle matter, driving up respiratory issues like asthma and allergies. This also ties into vector ecology, as changes in water access can alter habitats for mosquitoes. And water scarcity, which creates risks for water quality issues. Next slide, please. To address climate-related hazards affected by drought, we utilize the BRACE Building Resilience Against Climate Effects framework. The purpose of BRACE is to enhance our ability to prepare for and respond to these complex climate-related health conditions. This is an active 5-step process, including data analysis. We start by collecting and analyzing climate-related health data, community engagement, and health education. We use that data to raise awareness, conduct outreach, and inform the public about associated risks. Policy development, we use evidence to support and promote sustainable practices and, crucially, health equity. In evaluation, we monitor and assess the effectiveness of our interventions, ensuring we are spending resources efficiently. Next slide, please. Our foundation for this work is built upon years of data and research. This slide showcases some of our key reports that portrayed our climate and health adaptations and weather, climate, and health synthesis reports. These documents were built with collaboration through ADHS, ASU, and the University of Arizona, and they guide our strategic direction, identifying key vulnerabilities and establishing framework for adaptation and resilience across the state. Next slide, please. Through the Environmental Public Health Tracking Program, we focus on monitoring and conducting surveillance for health-related conditions associated with drought, like asthma, heat-related illness, and vector-borne diseases. Via the Arizona Environmental Public Health Tracking Data Explorer, our partners and the public can access and visualize health data from hospitalizations and emergency department visits and overlay this with drought data to start to look at associations and better understand how drought is impacting public health. We track both historical and projected drought impacts provided by NOAA directly in the Data Explorer. Next slide, please. Here is a live look at the kind of data the Data Explorer provides. The map shows drought duration and severity from 2021 across the state, measured by maximum consecutive weeks of moderate drought. If you look at the table, you can see significant impacts in counties like Yuma, Santa Cruz, and Yavapai, which reported the highest numbers of consecutive drought weeks in the year. This tool allows us to pinpoint our most vulnerable geographic areas, directing resources where they are needed most. Next slide, please. The Data Explorer also helps us to track secondary health effects. This map shows the age-adjusted rate of emergency department visits for asthma per 10,000 population in 2022. Drought conditions often worsen air quality due to dust storms, increase allergens from certain plants, and wildfire smoke. We can cross-reference high drought areas with the high asthma rates to see if there's a correlation that warrants targeted intervention, such as air quality alerts or respiratory health resources. Next slide, please. Drought also increases the risk and severity of wildfire, which poses an immediate public health threat. On the top map, you can see historical annual number of wildfires greater than 100 acres, indicating counties like Coconino and Pima having high activity hotspots. The map on the bottom provides a real-time situational awareness tool showing current fire parameters and the location of nearby healthcare and long-term care facilities. Interventions we have focused on these areas include improving forecasting and warning systems, executing targeted public service announcements, establishing evacuation procedures, and promoting indoor air filtration during smoke events. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Drought and heat are also inextricably linked, and our summary report from heat-related illness cases from 2024 showed the sustained challenge of combating heat-related illnesses in our state. We recorded over 5,000 total HRI emergency department visits and 1,500 inpatient hospitalizations. The data show that males in areas like Maricopa, Pima, and Mojave are disproportionately affected. HRI is not just a primary health event, it often exacerbates chronic conditions, with over 64% of hospitalizations also being related to cardiovascular disease as a comorbidity. And finally, over 51% of ED cases and 44% of inpatient admissions involved individuals engaging in recreational activities. This is an area we are working to focus on for more targeted public health messaging. Next slide, please. Based on the 2024 findings, we have developed the 2025 updated strategies and approaches for the Arizona Extreme Heat Preparedness Plan. This document is our roadmap to translating data into actionable public health practice. It emphasizes moving beyond simple warnings to implementing system-level changes, especially around protecting those with chronic conditions and providing targeted support for outdoor workers and recreational users. Next slide, please. We are continuously applying the BRACE framework to ensure our response is strategic, data-driven, and evaluated. Our environmental health priority hazards continue to be heat, wildfire, and drought, and we recognize the dual impact of drought. Our work relies on the continued cooperation of many partners, and by sharing data and coordinating our efforts, we can truly build resilience against these increasing climate effects. With that ends. Please let me know if there are any questions.
Thanks, Nikki. Questions for Nikki from first members around the table? Hearing none from members online. Any questions? Thanks, Nikki. So we'll move on to item 8, the drought declaration recommendation. I'll summarize some things that we've heard, but first, we missed this time around the Navajo Nation and the Gila River community, who usually are able to join us and talk about the impacts on their communities. They were unable to attend at the last minute. Also wanted to give a heads up. I think it's more in the spring. We have detailed discussions of the impacts on hydropower generation. But to add insult to injury and what's going on with the Colorado River reclamation, recently made it known to us that now there are some potential power generation issues cropping up at Hoover Dam as well as those elevations of Lake Mead fall. Unexpected issues that were not on the radar screen. So these things are all combining to just pile on to all of the impacts that we're seeing from the drought. And so the first thing I'll try to summarize is Nikki's presentation. We certainly saw there that heat-related issues certainly are attached to what we're seeing in this drought and the high temperatures, impacts on health and the environment that Nikki talked about in her presentation. In terms of the climatology and hydrology, I'll just say we heard mostly that we've had short-term drought, long-term drought, and expect more of the same moving forward. On what we might expect for precipitation moving forward, it's a little bit up in the air because of whether we're going to be in La Nina or not, or even with La Nina, what those impacts might be, both locally and in the Colorado River Basin. We saw some good news that the monsoon helped raise the level of Roosevelt Lake by a couple percentage points. And I know that's an unusual outcome for reservoir levels normally. It did catch my eye that SRP's not shifted over the deliveries from the Verde yet. I know from my past life that this is pretty late and indicative, as Stephen talked about, of the dry conditions that we've seen. Maybe the one little ray of hope that I've heard for both in-state Salton Verde River and Colorado River is that our fall late monsoon storms recharge the soil moisture a little bit. But unless we get to precipitation to create the opportunity for that to benefit the runoff. We're not sure how that will impact us. So my view of the world we're in is that certainly what we know in the near term, what we expect in the near term, and what we should plan for in the near term is continued drought conditions. And I would suggest to the group members that we do recommend to the governor that the drought declaration remain in place. Folks in the room are nodding yes. Mark
Second.
is second my semi-motion, informal motion.
Yes.
So unless there's any different opinion from those members online, we're going to move forward with that outcome. Anyone that's a member of the group online want to weigh in on the discussion about the recommendation? All right, so we will prepare that recommendation as always from the staff, and DWR will transmit that on to the governor's office. So item 9, the next agenda item, is the discussion of the 2025 Arizona Drought Preparedness Annual Report. And it is entitled Postponement of the Report. And I'll turn it over to Maggie to explain what's happening there.
Yeah, thanks, Director. I wanted to let this group know that the publication timeline for the 2025 Arizona Drought Preparedness Annual Report that several ICG members and several of the folks in this room contribute to every year has been pushed back slightly this year. The recent federal government shutdown has resulted in limited input from several of the key contributors to that report, and has led to delays in accessing and receiving important data needed for the report. So I will share an updated timeline as soon as possible so that everyone has ample time to review, provide feedback, and submit edits to the report. And thank you all again who contribute to that report every year.
Maggie, do we have an obligation, either statutorily or otherwise, to send that report at a certain point in time?
There's no statutory timeline associated with the report.
So when we transmit, I would suggest when we transmit the recommendation to the governor's office, we at least send them a note explaining that that report will be coming when we have opportunity to collect the information from the rest of the members. Hopefully the government will open soon and we'll be able to move forward. So it will be a good heads up for the governor's office so they're not wondering why the report's not coming along with the recommendations, as is our normal course of business. So Peter Mock, I did see your message pop up in the chat about the community. Thank you. I will turn now to the next agenda item, which is a call to the public. Would any of the folks from the public who've been participating want to ask questions or make comments to the group on any of the agenda items? I'll pause.
The hand raised.
Rita, is that Leslie?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Leslie, go ahead.
That's Leslie James for Creta, correct?
Yes, it is. Thank you. Thank you, Tom. And I wanted to tag off of a comment you made about some operational concerns at Meade. Reclamation, and we are also experiencing some unplanned operational issues at Glen Canyon Dam in regard to a transformer problem. There will be 2 units unavailable for, I would say, maybe the next 4 to 5 months at Glen Canyon. I mean, with the water levels that's kind of neither here nor there. However, we also, CRETA appreciated Interior's decision to not perform a high flow experiment this week, as was recommended. It's our understanding the primary reason was inability to adequately monitor the effects of that experiment, due in part to the shutdown. One last item. based on the last month's 24-month report, 24-month study, Glen minimum power pool is looking like potentially August or September of 26. So we're obviously very concerned about that. And the second year of the smallmouth bass experiment completed on October 20, I believe. WAPA's estimate of the cost this year was about 6.7 million. Last year's was about 18.9 million. And we are obviously very concerned about hydrology going into next year because discussions will begin, I think, fairly early in the year about what to do under that existing rod and with regard to that next year of experimentation. So just a quick update on Glen. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Leslie. And for those who might not connect dots, the high experimental high flow impact on power is they use the river outlet works and don't move water through the penstocks. And so it has some real negative consequences for the economics of the power generation. And it's a hotly debated issue every time one of those type flows comes up for consideration by Interior. Anyone else, members of the public? So I'm not seeing or hearing anyone. So with that, we're on to closing remarks and adjournment. Our next meeting will be sometime in the spring, probably May of 2026. Stay tuned for additional information. Hopefully we'll see some of you at Colorado Water Users Association meeting. If things do get to a point where public pronouncements about post 2026 can be made, we'll certainly share that in various venues. So we'll continue to work hard to see where we can go. I also wanted to mention that yesterday, Governor Hobbs, Republican leadership in the legislature and Democratic leadership in the legislature submitted a letter to Secretary Burgum about the status of the Colorado River negotiations, imploring the Upper Basin states to participate in meaningful ways and seeking greater involvement from the federal government to actually broker a deal. So that was, I thought, a very important message in a bipartisan way for our legislature and governor to send that message out into the world. So that occurred, late yesterday afternoon. And with that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Thank you to members of the group for all the work you're doing and all the work I know that you're going to continue to make this group meaningful and to give us the information we need biannually to make the recommendation to the governor. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. That was good to hear.